how I read in Italian and in that way prepare myself for Italian CILS B2 exam. That is what this video is about. I noticed that a bunch of you have questions about reading. How do you pick the right book for reading in a foreign language? How do you do the reading actually? Or whether you check the vocabulary when you bump across unknown words, and what are the other techniques that you should do while reading in a foreign language? Well, I will answer all those questions using an Italian book as a good example. In order to start reading, you have to pick up the right topic or the topic that is of your interest. This is essential for reading in a foreign language because every book that you take and you want to read, it has to be somehow interesting for you. Thus, for every language in which I read, depending on the level of the knowledge I have in this language, I choose certain topics to explore. For instance, in Italian, since my knowledge is a bit higher than in other languages, I explore the topics that are much more interesting and complex at the same time, and this is one of those books that requires more attention and proficiency in the language. Thus, the first thing that you should do is to choose the topic of your interest in foreign language, in this case Italian, and afterwards something that is essential for finding the right book for you to read it is reading the summary of the book. So you have to go at the end page, or in this case the inner page of the book, and read what is this story about. Thus, unless I already know the author and the style in which he or she writes, I would always read the summary of the book and see what it is about. So even though I know that genre would be interesting for me, it doesn't mean that the book itself would be interesting. So you have to read the summary and see what is the plot behind it and what is the book actually about. This is the first precondition to be met. If you like the story behind the book, then you can go to the next step, and that is to go through some of the pages of the book and read at least one or two pages and see the style of this concrete author, whether it resonates with you. So unless I have already read the concrete author, I would always do this because I think it's essential. In this way you will check whether the language that the author is using is too complex for you, whether the sentences are understandable, whether the style is interesting and compelling, and in that way you can make a decision whether to start reading this concrete book. The issue might occur, of course, if you don't have printed book itself in your hands, but you have only the opportunity to use the ebook or to order it online. Then it is a sort of challenge because you cannot see what is inside the book. In this case, I would always find some reviews about the book, or I would just ask for a recommendation from someone who is proficient or who has already read this concrete author. In this case, Djuro Carofiglio. I got the recommendation from the librarian to try to read his books. Thus, since I had the opportunity to see the printed book, I went through it briefly and saw the style of the author, whether the book is extensive, and if I like the style and the writing he uses. For me, it is easier when I already know the author, because when I like an author in a certain language, I just take more and more books that he or she writes and explore it deeply. In that regard, let me know what is your favorite author in Italian language in the comments below. The second point is how to actually read the book. So when we choose the book that is appropriate for our level, whether this is a book that is written in easy Italian language or a book that is written for an ordinary reader, we have to do some of the following techniques. Thus, in order for reading in a foreign language to be effective, we have to make it a bit challenging. So we have to read books that are in a way above our level, and we have at the same time to understand at least 70 or 80% of the content we read. If we understand even more, that's better. The point is that we don't have to understand every single word in a foreign language that we find in a book, and a very important thing is not to be bothered by constantly checking the vocabulary when we bump across the word we don't know. What I would suggest is to read without any distractions. So I would always go through the whole chapter. If I come across the words that I don't understand, I would just underline them and continue reading until the end of the chapter. And afterwards, when I finish this chapter, I could use the vocabulary and see what is the concrete translation of the word that was unknown to me. What is important as well is that while I'm reading, I'm not checking every word that is unknown to me, but only those words that I see repeat after a while. So I would designate those words as important. They are actually essential for the understanding of the book. So if there is a word that is mentioned only once in a whole book, I would not pay so much attention about it because it is not essential. It is nice to know the meaning of that word, but if you don't be bothered by that. The other thing is that even before I check the vocabulary of those words that repeat, since they repeat in different sentences, there is a huge chance that I could guess the meaning of the word. So when I go to vocabulary, I'm just checking whether the meaning that I guess is the right or not. The third thing that I would focus on while reading, actually while finishing the chapter, is to check as well the pronunciation of those words that are not familiar to me. And in Italian, most of the time, like 99%, I am sure that I can pronounce the new word in a good way, unless those are the words that are picked up from other languages. If it is an Italian word, 99% of the time I already know the pronunciation because the rules in Italian language are really clear. It's not like in English where you pronounce the same letters sometimes in a different way. So if I'm not sure about the pronunciation of the word, when I check the meaning of the word, I also check the pronunciation. You can do that in Google Translate, for instance. But I stress once again that it is essential to continue reading and don't distract the process. You do check pronunciation only afterwards when you finish one part of the book that is a whole in itself. What is the fourth very important thing that I would stress is that you have to do the reading in a certain amount of time that is not too long. So this book that is 300 pages long and not too extensive, I would say I have to read in at least 2 weeks, because in this way you will be involved in one constant process, and a process that is interesting, that is continuous. So I would recommend to you not to make the process of reading one book too long, because often we forget the things that we already read and the story has been cut in this way, and it is much more efficient to read a book at once in a short period of time. Beside that, after every chapter that I read, I would stay a bit longer on this part and think about the things that I have already read. What was the story about? What was this chapter about? I would try to recall the events and think a bit more, and even to try to guess the following events in the book that I read. Of course, what I find very useful is if you do that in language itself, in Italian in this case, try to describe the events that you have already read about. And the part of the reading that I think is very essential is the the following. While I'm reading the literature that is not only for pleasure but as well a sort of self-development, self-help, I like to read a lot of popular psychology, finances and similar. I try to be active while reading, so I try to take notes about the things that I find amazing, whether it is on the left or right side of the text in the book. I'm always designating those pages that I believe are essential from the concrete book at the front page of the book. So if I want to go back at one point to the concrete book, I could only go through the pages that I found the most important in the concrete book. So I don't only mark the parts and the pages that I find important in the book, but I also extract those pages at the front page of the book and I try to sort it out and make it very easy to go back to it at one point. So if I, after 3 years, come back to some of the books that I already read, it would be very easy to find the essential elements in this book and key takeaways from the book without going through the whole book again. At the same time, I could go back and see what were the keywords that I took away from that book, and in this way you will have a sort of track records of your progress, and after a while you can go back and see what were the things that you acquired in concrete language, and I think it is very useful. Thus guys, my CILS B2 exam in Italian language would be in less than 4 weeks, and let me know what do you think, whether I would be able to pass this exam only by using compelling and comprehensible input for reading, and of course listening to some of the most interesting Italian YouTube channels, at least for me. Let me know that in the comment. If you love this video about reading in Italian and these techniques that I shared with you, please like it and share it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and see you in some of the next videos. Bye!